This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. No blue wave, but a victory for Democrats nonetheless as they retake the House of Representatives from Republicans. But the GOP scores a win too, building its lead in the Senate. So in the new era of the divided government, how will the Democratic House deal with President Trump's administration? Plus, what role did evangelicals play in some of the key races? And from the Holy Land, how did Israelis view the midterms here in America? All those stories and more are ahead in this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. We want to begin, though, with the results of yesterday's closely watched midterm elections. Both parties had their wins and losses with some very tight races and surprises. Gary Lane brings us the highlights.
While many races are still too close to call, the blue wave Democrats had hoped for failed to materialize. It was more of a blue trickle. Republicans expanded their majority in the U.S. Senate, but lost control of the House of Representatives. With tallies out west still coming in, Democrats added at least 26 seats. In Tennessee, the GOP held Bob Corker's open seat, which will be filled by Republican Marsha Blackburn. She beat Phil Bredesen by 9 points. Out west, incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller lost in Nevada, but former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney trounced his opponent in Utah. He's now headed to the U.S. Senate. In Texas, voters showed you can't always buy elections. In a squeaker, Republican Senator Ted Cruz beat back a green wave of out-of-state Democrat money. Challenger Beto O'Rourke raised nearly $70 million.
This was an election about hope and about the future, and the people of Texas rendered a verdict that we want a future with more jobs and more security and more freedom.
Some incumbent Democrats who voted against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court were defeated. In North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp lost her re-election bid. Indiana's Joe Donnelly is out. And Josh Hawley beat Claire McCaskill by 6% in Missouri. Hawley gave credit where credit is due.
Tonight, the good Lord and the people of Missouri have given us the victory. We won.
And there were some firsts in this midterm election. More women than ever before. Possibly as many as 100 will now serve in the House of Representatives. Among them, another first, 2 Muslims. With Democrats now preparing for control of the House, still to be decided is if Nancy Pelosi will return to her role as House Speaker. Pelosi said Democrats will make their top campaign issue, health care, a priority.
Democrats will lower health care costs and prescription drug prices for seniors and families across America.
Democrats have also pledged to launch committee investigations of President Trump and his administration. And they'll possibly begin impeachment proceedings against both the president and Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, with a divided Congress ahead, still to be determined if the president, Democrats, and Republicans will work together, or if Washington will be more contentious and polarized than during President Trump's first 2 years.
And Gary Lane is here with us now to continue this conversation. So now we have a split, divided government. Was money a major factor in the Democrats winning the House?
Yes, I think it was a major factor. They poured a lot of money into the House and into the Senate. But let's look at the House right here in our own district. Lorraine Luria, she defeated the incumbent Congressman here, Scott Taylor. And every time you turned on the television, Ephraim, there were ads from Lorraine Luria. So money means you can get your message out and you can shape it the way you want it to be. The Republicans fell short in that area.
How did the Republicans manage to do so well in the Senate despite losing the House, you think?
Well, I think first we have to remember that in the Senate, the Republicans did not have that many incumbents up for re-election. You had more Democrats seeking re-election in the Senate. And a lot of those areas were red states that had voted for President Trump. So if you look at places like Missouri, you look at North Dakota, you look at Indiana, all those incumbent senators lost. And the main issue there, of course, Brett Kavanaugh. All 3 of those that lost, Donnelly, Heitkamp, and McCaskill, were a result of possibly a result of them voting against Brett Kavanaugh and the big circus on Capitol Hill over that confirmation.
We saw the president campaign extensively. I want to say some 50 rallies. Was he effective?
Oh, he was extremely effective. Everywhere the president went, his candidates won, just about. I mean, he has a majority of them did win in the places where he campaigned. And if you look at a place like Florida, he made the difference in Florida because what he did, he energized evangelicals to get out. And there were some reports that as many as 30% of the voters were evangelical in Florida. That's amazing. That's unheard of. That means 1 out of every 3 voters in Florida were possibly evangelical. President energized them, energized the base, made the difference in Florida and elsewhere.
One of the key points for Republicans in the Senate is they continue to confirm President Trump's judicial nominees, possibly to the Supreme Court as well.
Well, that's the thing about Republicans holding the Senate is those judicial nominees, not just the Supreme Court, but also the lower courts. That makes a big difference because Republicans will be in control. The president will nominate, and they will have the votes. More votes this time than they did for Brett Kavanaugh to actually confirm the president's nominees, not just for the courts, but also he says there will be a turnover in his administration coming up. Many of those people will have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate, not the House of Representatives.
Indeed, indeed. On to 2020.
Yeah, it'll be interesting 2 years, won't it?
It will be indeed, Gary. Thank you. So what will Democrats do with control of the House? CBN's Paul Strand brings us this look at what we might expect.
Paul Ryan wants lower taxes, lower spending. He wants to focus on the economy. Nancy Pelosi wants to focus on social issues, wants to raise taxes. She wants to spend more. She wants to investigate President Trump.
And the angry political division in the country could also have an impact.
Scores of investigations into the president, his administration, his family members, his actions, to launch impeachment proceedings.
There's also the possibility of Democrats taking a totally different course and deciding to work with the president on issues like infrastructure and prison reform. But they can't take both paths.
You can't simultaneously be the resist movement empowered in the halls of Congress and be working towards impeaching the president and be working with him on a shared agenda.
Pelosi says a very top priority is making LGBTQ rights trump any others, like a baker's religious right to not bake a gay wedding cake.
People of faith like Jack Phillips would be required to help them celebrate their weddings and things such as that. They want a federal law to that effect.
Efforts to limit abortion would likely be derailed.
Republicans have been making progress on a 20-week abortion ban. Progress on that, at least in the House, will stop.
And likely reverse course under Democrats.
More funding to Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers.
No matter where your political loyalties lie, this is for certain. Democrats winning the House means the path these lawmakers have been going down the last couple of years is certainly going to change. Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
The pro-life movement took a hit with the swing of power in the House. CBN News Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon explains why in our election night coverage and pointed to how things could play out overall in the House. Take a look.
Certainly one of the reasons evangelicals overwhelmingly sent President Trump to the White House is because he's pro-life. And I think tonight pro-life activists are feeling the wind being let out of their sails. Under a Democratic House, we're going to see a halt on the movement that they had been making over the past 2 years. The House had been working on a 20-week abortion ban. We're not going to see that continuing. The House is going to demand money for Planned Parenthood in the federal budget. And, you know, I think because there's not going to be a lot of governing over the next 2 years, it's going to be a lot easier for Republicans and Democrats to blame each other for gridlock and inaction. And as David pointed out, the Democratic base is not going to want them to work with President Trump. So I think we're going to see the House, instead of governing, using its subpoena power and going after the president that way. So it's going to be a very different environment on Capitol Hill. And I think immediately both parties are going to be looking towards 2020 and seeing how they can continuously one-up each other in terms of railing against each other.
Up next, we're going to look at the impact the evangelical vote had yesterday in one of the biggest and most influential states in the country, Florida. We're going to have that story when we come back. Stay with us. It appears evangelicals made up 26% of the vote for the midterms. And in Florida, it was reportedly among 30%, where Republicans won some very tight races. Ralph Reed with the Faith and Freedom Coalition spoke with CBN News during our special election night coverage about the power of the evangelical vote.
Well, someone who knows a thing or two about the power of evangelicals is Ralph Reed with the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and he joins us now. Ralph, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Ralph, what do you make of this big upset in Florida?
I tell you, it's a big win. This is, I think, the most expensive gubernatorial race in the history of Florida. I think both sides spent over $100 million between them, and we knocked on almost 500,000 doors in Florida, had 5,500 churches that distributed over 2 million voter guides, and we were texting about 1 million voters a day as early voting was going on. We knew the evangelicals were coming. That's an extraordinary number, 30%. I assume that's in the network exit poll, David, the 30% number for Florida.
That's right. That's a CNN exit poll.
I'm going to have to go back and check it, but there's no precedent for that in the modern history of Florida. That's an extraordinary number, and I think the White House and the RGA and the National Republican Senatorial Committee and certainly Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott are very grateful tonight that the rapture didn't happen before early voting began, because if it had, they would have lost in a landslide. And the evangelicals delivered this vote in a big way, and of course Donald Trump deserves an enormous amount of credit. He came in and endorsed Ron DeSantis in that primary, took a guy who had very low name ID, was not well known statewide, against a guy in Adam Putnam, who, by the way, is a very good man, had run statewide and won twice before, was the runaway front runner in that race. And Donald Trump's endorsement is what caused Ron DeSantis to win that primary by 20 points. And his endorsement is why he's governor tonight.
Ralph, I want to ask a real quick question for you. You had mentioned earlier that there were some 26.1 million evangelicals that you had been tracking around the country in some of these hotly contested races. Does this at all surprise you, this race here in Florida, this governor's race, does it all surprise you based on what you've been doing and what you've been tracking with your group?
No, we've been tracking the early vote literally nightly. We've been getting updates from the Secretary of State. We've had 19 canvassing teams walking neighborhoods along the I-4 corridor in Orlando and Miami-Dade, in the Panhandle around Jacksonville, in Hillsborough County and Pinellas around Tampa and St. Pete. I don't think there's an organization in the country that's not a political party that personally touched 1 million voters or more at their doorstep. And we felt a level of intensity and enthusiasm that we have not seen in a long time. And we felt like they were coming. They were going to come in big numbers, and they did. Obviously, we'll look at the totals once they come in from the roughly 3 million voters we were tracking. But if our numbers are right, and it was 30% of the vote, that means we had almost as many people vote on election day as we had vote early. That means we're going to end up with somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million evangelical voters in Florida.
Still ahead, how did other countries like Israel view the American midterms? We're going to have a look at that question right after this. Stay with us for more of CBN NewsWatch. Not only were Americans closely watching the midterms, so were others around the world. That's because the elections have a profound impact on other countries outside the U.S. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israelis were also watching and considering how the midterms will affect the Jewish state.
For the past 2 years, many Israelis agree with President Trump's policies. He moved the U.S. Embassy behind me to Jerusalem. He pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and he drew closer to Israel's neighbors like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. Head out to Jerusalem's open-air market, Mahane Yehuda, and you can find that reflected among Israelis talking about the midterms.
I'm sure Israelis as a whole, probably if a poll were to be done, Israelis as a whole would probably be more in favor of the GOP doing well in these elections.
I think the Democrats are terrible for Israel.
Why?
Why? They've taken a very hard left turn, and their policies are not pro-Israel.
You can safely say, and I've been polling this since the elections, the presidential elections, Israelis love Trump, and that he's only gained in popularity here. And there are a number of reasons, both his personality, he's very blunt, and the way that he has defended Israel in the United Nations and really shaken up the United Nations with Ambassador Haley and with the policies, that's music to Israeli ears.
Pollster Mitchell Barak says Israelis favor certain candidates.
They seem to want candidates that are more pro-Israel. That tends to be Republicans. That tends to be the candidates from the evangelical community, from the South.
The question is, will Congress, beginning January 2019, will Congress provide tailwind or headwind to the president's national security policy?
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger served as Israel's liaison to the U.S. Congress and knows the importance of these elections for the House, Senate, and Israel.
We should never underestimate the power of the legislature. The legislature can provide very, very intense headwind to American presidents, which would transform an American president into a very weak personality in global politics. I trust that reflecting the majority of the American population, the coming Congress, beginning January 2019, will be as supportive of enhanced U.S.-Israel relations.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Here now is a look at some of the other major stories we're following for you inside the CBN newsroom today. Italy said Tuesday it is working to help relocate Asia Bibi and her family. The foreign ministry said it was coordinating with other countries to ensure their safety. This comes after protests were sparked following her acquittal from blasphemy charges against Islam. Bibi's husband is warning their family is in danger in Pakistan. Even Italy's hardline anti-immigrant interior minister stressed he would do all that is humanly possible to keep them safe. Also Tuesday, a German lawmaker called for Germany to grant Bibi refuge. A meeting between the U.S. and North Korea has been postponed. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was scheduled to meet with a key aide to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un Friday. The State Department announced the decision to reschedule the meeting in the middle of the night as results from the U.S. midterm elections were coming in. There was no direct explanation, but sources told CNN the move signals that North Korea has not been willing to cooperate with the U.S.'s expectations. U.S. Christmas sales are predicted to soar beyond $1 trillion this year. CNBC reports a study released Tuesday says that a 6% increase from last year marks the strongest growth since 2011. The study also showed in-store sales would rise by 4.4%, and online sales are predicted to grow by 16.6%. You can find more on these stories and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. Up next, what is the relationship between voting and prayer? We're going to take a look at that question when we come back. Voting is certainly a show of political power, but can voting also be a spiritual exercise? Paul Strand visited a group of Christians who say it definitely is.
Folks at Hope Christian Church outside Washington, D.C. felt so strongly about prayer as a focus that they hosted the Rise Up conference just before Election Day. The key difference being that voting is about what you want, while prayer is about what God wants.
We need to pray in God's priorities and God's agenda, but the challenge is we have to do it in unity.
Cindy Jacobs of the intercessory prayer movement, Generals International.
Well, God is not a donkey or an elephant, right? You know, he's the Lamb of God. So, you know, whichever party, you need to pray and vote biblical values, but please take time to pray today.
Christian leaders gathered here to do just that for an entire day and evening before the final votes in these midterms would be cast.
We believe God has got some great things in store for America if we will vote according to his will.
We are his mouthpiece of his will in the earth. When we pray, we're bringing the will of God from heaven to earth. And so if we don't pray, we're going to miss it.
I believe we are under a mediated judgment from God right now.
Jackson says God is working to unveil national sins, like those revealed by the Me Too movement, the trouble between the races, and the upheaval over economic inequality.
I believe the Bible has a way of dealing with all these, but the church has to step up. So what you're going to find is people are going to be exposed, people are going to be removed, and then others are going to be promoted. And I believe we need to pray in the right people.
I just want to encourage everyone to rise up, that's what we're calling our prayer day, and just go make your voice change a nation.
Voting's pretty much wrapping up, but praying, you can do that anytime. God likes to hear from you, and the nation certainly needs it. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Hope Christian Church, Beltsville, Maryland.
Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is faithful. I like to leave you with this thought. God is faithful. Even when we fail, he is faithful to extend an open hand to lift us up. Take comfort knowing you have the love of the Father, and you cannot fail. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday. That will do it for this half hour of CBN News Watch. Our second half hour is coming up right here on the CBN News Channel. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about throughout the day at cbnnews.com. And we'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Twitter, Facebook, as well as Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow, everybody. Goodbye and God bless.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for the second half hour of CBN Newswatch. I'm Efrem Graham. Voting is done and the midterm elections are over. Democrats now control the House and Republicans have increased their majority in the Senate. While some races are still too close to call, the blue wave for Democrats that they hoped for actually didn't materialize. Some would say it was more of a blue trickle. Republicans picked up at least 3 seats in the U.S. Senate and Democrats added at least 26 seats in the House. Healthcare and immigration were among the top issues on the minds of voters. They also rejected 3 incumbent Senate Democrats who voted against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Senator Claire McCaskill lost to Josh Hawley in Missouri. In his victory speech, Hawley gave credit where credit is due.
Tonight, the good Lord and the people of Missouri have given us the victory. We won.
The Democrats' gains in the House came from a number of suburban areas like Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Newcomer Elaine Loria defeated incumbent Scott Taylor there. Democrats had targeted the area, which leans slightly Republican. Many believe their barrage of negative ads focused on allegations of forged ballot signatures by Taylor's staff made the difference.
It was a suburban area, and they're targeting what they perceived as their electorate, which was the white suburban woman. Clearly, they made no bones about that. But I think the campaign faux pas and the fact that an investigation was opened up and clearly there were signs of fraudulent signatures on there basically put blood in the water. And when there's blood in the water, the sharks come. And clearly the sharks came from all over the country to feed. And although it was a razor-thin loss, it was a loss nonetheless.
And there were some firsts in this midterm election. More women than ever before. Possibly as many as 100 will now serve in the House of Representatives. Among them, another first, 2 Muslims. Rashida Tlaib is the first Muslim congresswoman in Michigan, and Ilhan Omar is the first Muslim congresswoman in Minnesota. Ayanna Pressley is the first black congresswoman from the state of Massachusetts. Democrat Deb Haaland defeated Republican Janice Arnold Jones for New Mexico's 1st congressional district seat. This makes her the first Native American woman in the House of Representatives. And Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the youngest woman to be elected to Congress. She is 29 years old. Well, it appears evangelicals made up at least 26% of the vote for the midterms, and in Florida, it was reportedly among 30%, where Republicans won some tight races. Ralph Reed from the Faith and Freedom Coalition told CBN News during our election night coverage the power of the evangelical vote was on display in some key places in these races.
We knew the evangelicals were coming. That's an extraordinary number, 30%. I assume that's in the network exit poll, David, the 30% number for Florida.
That's right. That's a CNN exit poll.
I'm going to have to go back and check it, but there's no precedent for that in the modern history of Florida. That's an extraordinary number, and I think the White House and the RGA and the National Republican Senatorial Committee and certainly Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott are very grateful tonight that the rapture didn't happen before early voting began, because if it had, they would have lost in a landslide. And the evangelicals delivered this vote in a big way.
Reid says more than 5,500 churches were involved in distributing voter guides in Florida. He also says the Faith and Freedom Coalition canvassed the I-4 corridor, knocked on almost 500,000 doors, and sent texts to 1 million voters daily ahead of that election in Florida. Not only were Americans closely watching the midterms, so were others around the world. That is because the elections have a profound impact on other countries outside the U.S. Israelis are one group considering how the outcome of the midterms will affect the Jewish state.
We should never underestimate the power of the legislature. The legislature can provide very, very intense headwind to American presidents, which would transform an American president into a very weak personality in global politics. I trust that reflecting the majority of the American population, the coming Congress, beginning January 2019, will be as supportive of enhanced U.S.-Israel relations.
In Tuesday's midterms, voters in some states approved major changes to voting laws. Several states approved initiatives adopting voter ID laws that are aimed at curbing voter fraud. Michigan approved an amendment to institute automatic voter registration and also allow voters to request an absentee ballot for any reason. In Maryland, voters approved a measure that would allow residents to register on Election Day. It is now the 18th state to allow same-day registration. And in Florida, voters approved a measure that would automatically restore voting rights to most felons who've completed their sentences. Here's a look now at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Italy said Tuesday it is working to help relocate Asia Bibi and her family. The foreign ministry said it was coordinating with other countries to ensure their safety. This comes after protests were sparked following her acquittal from blasphemy charges against Islam. Bibi's husband is warning their family is in danger in Pakistan. Even Italy's hardline anti-immigrant interior minister stressed he would do all that is humanly possible to keep the family safe. Also Tuesday, a German lawmaker called for Germany to grant Bibi refuge. A meeting between the U.S. and North Korea has been postponed. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was scheduled to meet with a key aide to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un Friday. The State Department announced a decision to reschedule that meeting in the middle of the night as the results from the U.S. midterm elections were still coming in. There was no direct explanation as to why, but sources told CNN the move signals North Korea was not cooperating with the U.S.'s expectations. United States Christmas sales are predicted to soar beyond $1 trillion this year. A study released Tuesday says that a 6% increase from last year marks the strongest growth since 2011. The study also shows that in-store sales would rise by 4.4% and online sales are expected to grow by 16.6%. You can find more on these stories and others throughout the day at cbnnews.com. There are mass protests in Iran over the United States reimposing sanctions on the Islamic nation. The sanctions target Iran and the countries that trade with it. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has vowed to sell oil and break the sanctions. The country is already in the middle of an economic crisis, with its currency trading at the rate of 145,000 to $1 US. CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas spoke with our Mark Martin about the sanctions and their global significance.
Well, this latest round of sanctions is by far the most significant, right?
It is. Pretty much it's a second round of sanctions since the United States pulled out of the controversial Iran nuclear deal that was signed by the previous administration back in 2015. In essence, the second round, Mark, goes after about 700 Iranian-linked individuals, entities, companies, including major banks, oil exporters, shipping companies, aircrafts, vessels. In total, Mark, in the last 2 years, over 900 Iranian entities have been slapped by these crippling sanctions. Clearly, the administration is trying to send a very, very strong message to the Iranian regime. Keep in mind, the administration, President Trump, during the campaign was very, very hard on the previous administration's handling of this Iran nuclear deal. He thought it was a rotten deal from the get-go, and he's using this time and the new round of sanctions to, in essence, create a new deal. Whether that is in the works is still to be known.
Well, we need to mention that the Trump administration is giving exemptions to 8 countries to continue importing Iranian oil. Do we know who is on that list and why the White House is doing this?
Yeah, and I think to our viewers, you'll probably be surprised to say, wait a minute, I thought this was all about crippling sanctions. Why are we allowing Iran to continue selling its oil? Keep in mind, the oil industry is at the crux, at the heart of Iranians' economy. So here's what we understand. As you mentioned, there are 8 countries that the United States, that the White House has exempted from this deal. The 8 are following: China, India, Greece, Italy, Turkey, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. An important note here is that this deal for them, this exemption, will run out in the next 6 months. According to Secretary of State Pompeo, who said this morning, the idea here is that it would give countries like India, keep in mind, India is the second largest importer of Iranian oil. China is number 1. The idea for this White House is to allow some of these emerging countries to not suffer such a blow from potential sanctions against them. So they've given these 8 countries 4 to 6 months to get their act together, and eventually, as Secretary Pompeo said, that they would basically go down to importing 0 barrels of oil from the Islamic regime.
What is the president's calculus with this new round of sanctions?
The calculus with this White House is that this will force the Iranians, number 1, to the negotiating table, to negotiate a whole new nuclear deal, which would in essence say to the Iranian regime, you have got to cease and desist with your nuclear ambitions. That is completely off the table. You agree to that, and we will bring you back into the global fold. Number 2, I think less talked about, but it is clearly implied. This particular White House wants a regime change, wants a new leadership in the government. Whether that's going to happen is very, very doubtful. Keep in mind, we are celebrating 39 years, November 4th, 1979, when Iranian Muslims, radical Muslims, took over our U.S. embassy in downtown Tehran, and they have basically survived over the last 40 years with all of the economic pressure, political, military pressure on this country. They have survived 40 years later, and there is no indication that the ruling Ayatollahs are going to any time exit the stage.
Well, what has been the reaction in Iran overall?
Well, I mean, they are feeling the pinch. There is no doubt about it. On the streets of Tehran, people are feeling the squeeze. Everything from transportation, food, medical costs, everything has gone up, double, sometimes in triple numbers. And so they are feeling the squeeze. The United States is very clear. The administration is very clear. Our enemy, we're not targeting the Iranian people. We are going after the regime. We want the regime to reform, as Secretary Pompeo said, that the pressure will be relentless, his words, and will continue until, quote, the revolutionary course by the Islamic regime is put to an end.
Coming up, the cake battle is back. Hawaii, Colorado's baker Jack Phillips is back in court when we return. And welcome back. Masterpiece cake shop baker Jack Phillips is now both on the offense and defense as Colorado comes after him yet again. This time, it's for refusing to bake a cake to mark a transgender changing from male to female. Meanwhile, he is suing the state. Paul Strand looks at why his battle with Colorado is a matter that all Christians should be paying attention to.
Baker Jack Phillips, all he wants to do is make cakes. But it seems all Colorado wants to do is make trouble for Jack.
The state agency acting against Phillips lost here at the U.S. Supreme Court, with justices specifically blasting it for hostility toward Phillips' religious beliefs. Now the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is going after the Christian baker again, this time for refusing a transgender celebration cake.
At this point, they're just targeting Christians. This is outright Christian persecution.
This time around, though, constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis believes the commission will be more subtle.
The Masterpiece decision was very particular to the commission to say you cannot be overtly hostile. So now what they're doing is they're just going to say, well, we won't be as obvious about our hostility, but we still want to go after Jack.
Meanwhile, Phillips and his lawyers are going on offense by suing the Colorado bureaucrats.
They are actually striking back and saying, this is just outright persecution. You're not interested in stopping discrimination. You're interested in hunting Christians down.
If Christians are always only on the defensive, then we're going to continue to lose ground eventually. We have to be also making sure that we're standing up and we're standing forward.
Ellis and Hunt warned people of faith should be deeply concerned about their religious freedom, given some of today's leaders and officials.
Even after the Colorado Civil Rights Commission heard from the U.S. Supreme Court in a 7-2 decision, including Obama appointees telling them to stop targeting people of faith, the government essentially ignored it.
This is about whether or not the government can compel you or me to say something and to embrace and celebrate messages that go against our sincerely held religious beliefs.
Jack Phillips is very much a canary in the coal mine with regards to the very legal issues, very important legal issues that we're going to be facing.
So why care about this one baker and his little masterpiece cake shop in a suburb of Denver? Because if you hold certain beliefs and you're a Christian, you could be the next Jack Phillips. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Supreme Court.
Still ahead, a police officer walks off the job to pursue a career in music. Find out how a divine encounter sparked his journey when we return. A police officer walked off the job to pursue his passion, a career in music. But the real twist to this story is the officer's encounter with a stranger who told him everything he already knew. Sound biblical? Take a look. From Charlotte, North Carolina, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to Ferguson, Missouri, deadly police shootings shook these cities. Chaos, riots, and racial strife sometimes followed. Though miles away, these recurring incidents hit close to home for this former police officer. Terrence Howell joined the Franklin, Virginia Police Department years ago, hoping to make change in his community.
As a police officer, you're wired differently. Most people, when they hear gunshots, they're running away from where the shots are coming from. As a police officer, you're trained to go to where those shots are going.
Franklin's police chief still remembers Terrence for that little something extra he brought to the job.
We come into this business with the thought that we're going to change the world and do good things. In the 5 years that Terrence was with us, he did good things and he changed at least the impressions of many people in this community in a favorable sense as to how police officers in this city are viewed and trusted.
Terrence's faith fueled his work ethic, but it also triggered a change. So you're comfortable, you're serving the force, you doing what many would be considered an honorable career, and to be a man of color doing it too, also honorable. What's happened? Is there a wrestling inside you? What's going on?
Growing up, I always wanted to be a musician. Music was something that was just very important to me. Running through my family is basically a family of musicians and ministers, and I wanted to also be a musician. I can remember many times especially when I was working on night shift, I would have just thoughts and just visions. What if I pursued music? What if I gave it a shot? I wonder what could happen. And I will always have that in the back of my mind, but then reality will set in. This is what I'm doing now.
Terrence convinced himself law enforcement was the right career until an unusual encounter completely changed the direction of his life.
I was actually thinking about music and actually thinking about a career in music when I was serving subpoenas. And one day I was just going door to door, hanging subpoenas on the door, and there was an older gentleman who was just watching me on his front porch, rocking back and forth, just watching me.
The man called out to Terrence.
He called to me, he said, "Young man." I turned, he didn't say officer, or my badge or my gun. He said, "Young man, come here." So I came to where he was, pulled himself up on the railings and he looked at me, square in my eye, and said, "When are you going to put that badge and gun down and begin your real work, son?"
In shock, Terrence asked the man to repeat what he said.
"Your real work is in the kingdom of God. Your real work is in ministry. And it's only so far you can go wearing that badge and gun. It's time to put it down and begin your real work."
He has never seen that man again.
I knew it was of God, so I made that decision right then to take the leap of faith and to jump.
That leap has propelled Terrence into a successful music career. In 2014, he launched Revival Music Company. And it's more than just a label. Terrence says it's a movement to bring unity and healing across diverse communities.
My joy from today's session was bringing in people together, people of different backgrounds, different races, coming together, united in one goal, and that's to worship and to show love to one another.
It includes musician Joseph Stallings and Sharon Jackson.
I've been in a lot of groups and played a lot of music, sang a lot of songs. But what's different about revival worship is that it's not about the song. It's really not about the music when it comes down to it. It's about the relationship between people.
Each person is important. And then the other thing that I love is that we are so different. And I love that. I think that says a lot in our culture when we're from different churches, we're from different ethnic backgrounds, from different denominations, from different places, and we're able to come together and make this really cool music together.
It's a sound Terrence says always carries a special music. His new song, Untainted Love, is no different.
This love that he has for us is untainted. It's not tainted with the failed expectations of, I fell short of his glory today. I didn't quite measure up as a Christian today of where I should have been. But his love, it goes beyond that. It transcends all.
It transcends indeed. It's a powerful message Terrence hopes will transform lives, heal communities, and bridge the divide. Stay with us. There's much more of CBN NewsWatch coming up right after this. Christian singer Lauren Daigle makes a debut appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon this evening. The Christian singer also recently appeared on The Ellen Show. She received praise and criticism for performing on the show with an openly gay host. She responded saying, quote, "I think the second we start drawing lines around which people are able to be approached and which are not, we've already completely missed the heart of God." Her album, Look Up Child, is number 3 on the Billboard 200 and is one of the top-selling albums in the country right now. Time for your Wednesday word. Today's word is faithful, and I leave you with this thought. God is faithful. Even when we fall, He is faithful to extend an open hand to lift us up. Take comfort knowing you have the love of the Father, and you cannot fail. With that word, make this a wonderful Wednesday and a great rest of the week. That concludes this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time for another edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.